and welcome back to Heavenly Minded. This is a podcast where we explore what it means to be in the world but not of it, and what that looks like on a day-to-day basis. How do we live that statement out practically? My name's Chloe Wilson. I'm a presenter on UCB2, and today we're thinking about radio. It would be really easy for me to sit here and to talk to you about radio because that's what I do as a day job. I talk for a living. But I want to introduce you to Henrietta, who is a radio presenter, a DJ, producer and composer. Because let's face it, you'd rather hear a conversation than just me talking at you for the entirety of this episode. So without further ado, let's dive into the conversation with Henrietta Smith-Rolla. As I've already said, you are a composer, a producer, a DJ, you're a radio presenter. First question, is there anything that you can't do? Because that's an impressive list.
Why? Thank you. There's so many things I cannot do. Mm-hmm. I can't read music.
Really?
Yeah.
But yet you're involved in music.
Yeah. I try so hard.
Okay.
And it hasn't hindered my career. It's made it really interesting because it's made me realise how I understand sound.
Okay.
And the spectrum of sound, and it's in production and creating things out of nothing or things that you've heard in your head kind of thing. And it's meant that I've been able to work with orchestrators. I didn't even know there was such a profession as an orchestrator. Yeah. And they take the audio that you have written and they turn it into sheet music so that other people can play it. And it's just a joy. It's like, wow, working with someone who is so skilled that they can translate what you've written just by listening to it.
But as we said, you are involved in music. So tell us how that all came about. Was music a big part of your childhood, for example?
Yeah. So my mother, Catherine,
Catherine.
also known as Kit,
We
just
love her.
like the car from Knight Rider. Any of you out there who remember Knight Rider? Anyway, when she found out she was pregnant with me, she prayed that her child would have music in their life. She told me about this a few years ago, and I was just like, wow. Like now, reliving that moment when she told me, I was like, oh my goodness, this is what God had planned. Like, this is no mistake. And it was answered prayer.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? So it's been with me from the very, very beginning. Music has been my life. It's been somewhere where I've gone for everything. And I've only recently given my life. So music was that support for me in a lot of ways. And when I was younger, I would record the radio and just like make playlists on cassettes. And I would, when I was playing an instrument, I used to play the violin. And I'd get home and I would have just learned how to do a duet with someone else. And I was an only child at the time, so I would record myself playing one part of it and then play along to the next bit. And it was like music was everything. It was like I could just hear so many things, and I just watched film after film after film for the music. So musicals. I love musicals.
Favourite musical?
Oh, that's a really difficult question. I'm going to say Sound of Music.
Yes.
And I'm going to say Sound of Music because it was the first time I learned what a round was.
Oh, yes.
And I still sing that round that they do on that carriage.
Yeah.
And it was just like, wow, it's so technical. Like, how stunning that you can sing the same thing, but sort of overlap them and sing them at different times, but they become this one thing. I was like, this is amazing. How do I do that?
Yeah.
How do I make those sounds? And I loved how it was technical. It was like understanding how it worked.
It seems like you like the detail in things. Is that right?
Oh, yeah. Detail. I have a brain that needs to understand how things work so that I can use them or, use them, yeah. I have to understand the mechanics of things. I like taking things apart and putting them back together again. And I like building systems and following them.
Well, that took a turn. That went very serious all of a sudden. You should have seen the look on her face just then. Oh my goodness me. I was like, I feel like I've got to follow every single system ever made right now. Okay. Slightly freeing from my life. But we mentioned that you are a DJ. Now, I am a radio presenter, and lots of people would say that a DJ is the same as a radio presenter, but I wouldn't say that the two are the same, because in my head, a DJ is someone who stands there and is heavily involved in the music and has got the is it a turntable? You've got turntables.
That's correct. Yeah,
okay.
You stand in front of turntables.
Yeah.
You can have vinyl turntables, which I used to use.
Mm-hmm.
I can't do that anymore because you can't carry the records around. And now I use digital turntables and we use CDJs. It's kind of like industry standard. And I had to learn how to use them to do my job, because using vinyl, DJing, doesn't really work when you're on tour. One, they're really, really heavy. Two, you can only play what you've brought with you. Digitally now, I can take thousands of tracks with me, but I can't in a record crate. It's like, it's just too heavy, not enough. And then you'd find technically when you get to a venue, it's like 4 a.m. and you're on last and the turntable needles are broken and you don't have your needles, or the balance on the turntables is all off, so your records don't actually play. So stressful. So it's very, very different in that sense that you're curating the music in a physical sense. And I like to tell stories when I'm DJing.
Do you?
Yeah.
How do you do that?
Yeah, well, lyrically.
Okay.
So lyrically and bass lines. And what's been amazing is that my training in DJing and telling stories on dance floors with music has totally come into my radio show.
Okay.
And the way it's come in is that I had one of the earlier shows, I was like, how can I get God into this show every show? And I realised that my music brain actually has quite a huge scope of genres. So I was playing Morricone, Adonai, Adonai, like this choir, sing Adonai. And I've got the producer, one of the producers in the studio, just like with his arms up in the air, like, you know, really going for it. You can't see me, but my arms are up in the air.
They were.
And I'm going for it. And I looked over and I was like, you are singing the Lord's name. And I was like, this is brilliant. So my idea of telling stories during DJ sets has meant that I want to tell the story of Jesus. I want to reveal him. I want him to be present in the music. And it also comes out when I'm choosing music for the shows. Like I say no to things. Like when it was Halloween week, my producer was like, with the script, was like, da-da-da-da, we mentioned this Halloween thing. And I'm like, nope.
Good on you.
I said, no. I said, I don't celebrate Halloween and I don't want to celebrate Halloween on my show. So I took a bunch of stuff out of the script.
Okay.
Things like, oh, all you getting ready in your costumes. I'm like, no, I don't.
No.
I don't want to promote that for young people, you know? And it was met with shock, you know?
Yeah.
But what was great was that I knew before I started this job that it was way bigger than me. And it was God ordained. Like he'd put this together. So he'd put me with this producer. So whatever struggles we have and the conversations we have, God's behind it. It's like Jesus' name is so powerful that, you know, it's like I say it and it's like, whoa, whoa.
It's a good sound effect. I quite like that. I might take that. But no, that's really interesting because it is a show on BBC Six Music. It's national radio. Now, I can completely relate to, you know, it's a privilege, isn't it, to talk about Jesus and to be able to interweave that with songs. You know, I present a show on UCB2 and we have the absolute freedom to talk about Jesus in every single breath that we have. I mean, we choose not quite to do that because as Christians, realistically, that's not what we're doing every single second of every single day. So you've got to get the balance right. But I love that even though you've got what might be quite a secular show because you've got like the people's party mix and all of these kind of connotations of partying and maybe going out. And yet you are a Christian, you are a believer. And the way that you just interweave that all is just stunning is the only word that comes to mind. But is it difficult getting that balance right? Because obviously you want to bring your faith in when you can, but there must be a limit to what you can say.
I think for me, I'm learning that I can only do this job with him. So when I'm at home and I'm putting the music together for shows, I'm speaking with him. I'm like, or I hear him say, not that one. And I'll be like, I really want to listen to that. I really want to put that in the show. It's going to be really great.
Yeah.
It's not for this show. It might not be for this show. It might be for something else or whatever, but it's very much that I'm doing it with him. So it is a really interesting process because it's not one that I discuss with my producer. It's very much me and him in my studio at home. Yeah. And it's just really interesting because what will happen is songs will be revealed to me from my past that I was like, I had no idea you were in that. Mm-hmm. And then I'm like, oh, I have to get that on somehow.
Well, tell us how you actually got to do your own radio show, because you said that was nothing to do with you. It was all God kind of orchestrating things and putting things together. Tell us that story, because I need to know. Come on.
Yeah, so I had been doing a few really random shows on the BBC. So things like World Service. They approached me and were like, hey, do you want to interview these artists, these electronic artists for this feature we're doing? And I'd be at home and I'd be like, yeah, sure, I'll do it. Get on Zoom, do the whole thing. They sent the script, print it off. I have a printer at home. Anyway, and it was so terrifying, but I just felt like you should do this, just do this. Okay. And I kept on having these scenarios where people would want to interview me from the radio. And I was like, radios, wow, radio. And the whole while I was listening to UCB. So radio had become much more present in my life as a way of listening to music and communicating and being with people, because this was very much like during the lockdown.
Yeah.
So I'd done lots of demos, lots of demoing, and I didn't realise that that's what you do in radio to find your place. So I was doing demos with different production houses. I did stuff for Radio 1 and it didn't work out. And I was like, God, what are you doing with me? And little did I know, he was training me. He was training me up. And then really out of the blue, because that's how he works, this production house in Manchester called Reform Radio got in touch and said, we've put your name forward to host our show on Six Music. Wow. And I was like, oh, really? And I'd done so many demos at this point, and often people will use your name for a pitch for funding, so Arts Council funding, PRS funding, and they'll tell you, they'll be like, we've got this concept and this idea, but we're going to use your artist name and you as the tool to sort of push it over the edge. Never win them. And this one did. Now, I wasn't in the conceptual stages of creating this show for radio. And I didn't understand that what happens on radio is shows go up for tender, which means lots of different production houses can fight to produce that show. And so the Six Music shows had gone out for tender, and it was Friday nights, 7 till 9, and Reform Radio 1. So then I get an email saying, hey, you've got a Zoom with the head of Six Music. And I'm like, okay, that's weird. And I'm just getting on with all my other stuff, by the way.
Yeah.
Other stuff going on. I'm still doing gigs. And then I'm sat in my studio and I'm just like, cool. I wonder what this is about. Mm-hmm. And bless her, she just said, I don't get to do this very often, but I'd love to welcome you to the BBC. I went, wait, what? Like, I don't know what's happening. And I was like, great, thank you. And she was like, if you'll accept. And I'm like, yes. I didn't really know what I was saying yes to. Okay. I really didn't know. I did know that God was behind it, so I had to trust him because it all happened so very quickly. I say it happened quickly. She said at that point, you can't tell anyone. That you can't tell anyone because you have to keep it quiet.
Yeah.
Because we haven't told all the people that need to be told, but, it's still a thing. So I had to wait a month before I could tell anyone. I told my mum.
Oh, of course you did.
Yeah, I did.
Mums don't count when they say don't tell anyone.
No, I actually asked her, I said, who can I tell? And I said, can I tell my mum? She was like, yeah, she'll be really proud. And I did. And it was like, wow, you're hosting a radio show. You've never hosted a radio show before. What do you do when you host a radio show? I didn't even know any of the radio language. Mm-hmm. There's a term, you'll know it, back anno. I had no idea what that term meant. And the people that I was working with assumed that I did.
Oh.
And this goes on to this moment of a DJ and a radio DJ, very different things in the tasks that you need to complete. So I had to be very honest and be like, listen, I'm learning this and I need your support in this. And I had to learn very, very quickly.
Yeah.
And then later on, I had some support in some training, and I had to listen back to the show with her, and she just like astonished me because she, you know, just made me realize that I could do this.
Yeah.
I just find myself in the studio looking at all of the dials and the faders and the buttons and things, and I see all the branding, and I'm like, like, what's going on? Just looking around like, okay. And then having to just go, oh, it's for your glory, so it's cool.
Yeah.
You know? Like, doesn't matter how nervous I am or ill-equipped I think I am, and sometimes I think, oh, I don't know much about music. Oh, I don't know. And often I'll have moments when I'm live and my producer's there in the room and I'll come off a link. That's when you speak in between music. And I'll be like, was that okay? And she'll be like, oh, yeah, there's nothing wrong with that.
Ah.
And so I think there's going to be this ongoing relationship with him about how to do the radio and where I get my confidence from. Yeah.
But I think there is an assumption when I've told people that I'm a radio presenter, they assume that I walk into the studio, I've spent most of the day doing whatever I want to do. I walk in, I press a few buttons and I just speak. Like there is no preparation whatsoever and I just say the first thing that comes to mind. Sometimes I do just say whatever comes to mind, but that is when sometimes the Holy Spirit drops something and I go, oh, you want me to say that now? And I'll have something planned, but I have to be completely prepared to go off script because the Holy Spirit drops something and I go, but I wanted to talk about weird road names. I didn't want to talk about Jesus in this particular moment, but you have to be so prepared for all of a sudden just for something to change and you go, right. But is that an assumption that you get as well, that people think that you literally just waltz in there almost like a diva style and everyone does everything for you and you just sit there and you just talk?
Yeah. And I think I had that assumption myself before I did it because I didn't know. From when I started it, it wasn't that I walked in with that kind of presence. It was very much like, I'm ready to understand how this works. And I lent on friends who are in radio and I just asked them really basic questions. I was like to my friend, Kath, you've been a producer of show. She used to produce Marianne Hobbs. And I said, what's the role of a host and what's the role of a producer? Because I'm assuming we're going to have a relationship, like a working relationship. We're going to have to be able to communicate. We're going to have to understand one another so that we can work. And she gave a wonderful like breakdown of what it was and just summed it up in the sense that the producer's role is to make sure that the host has everything they need to deliver the show. And I thought, ooh, interesting, because I'm sure people have been in this position and taken advantage of that. And I was very clear in my head. I was like, I don't want to take advantage of that. But now I know that I can ask for what I need. So if I need something, for something to work, for me to be able to speak, I can ask for it. And I tell you what was really weird for me was like someone asking me if I wanted a cup of tea or do I need anything? Do I need a drink? And I'm like, well, I'm pretty self-sufficient. I've got my tea flask in there. I carry tea with me everywhere, water, the whole thing. And so giving that over as well, it's like, oh, you're here to make sure that I'm hydrated, you know?
That you don't dry up mid-sentence.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so it's just... yeah, it's people do assume a lot. I assumed a lot, but I also wasn't completely aware of how long it was going to take to find the right balance to work and being a host and looking after, you know, my work family, you know. As soon as we began, I was like, well, this is my family now.
Yeah.
Like, we're going to see a lot of each other and I care about you loads already. Do you know what I mean? So I didn't realize how long it was going to take, and it's ongoing. We don't know each other, but we have this pretty intimate relationship where my producer is helping to put together language so that I can speak. But then also me realizing that my producer's doing so much work around the show, organizing other members of staff for it. And then when I challenge something that my producers put in the script, it's how I handle it. It's like, do I go put my foot down, or do I understand that this might be something that she's actually really close to? And me taking it away is actually more of a personal thing than it is a work thing. Yeah. So it's just like having a balance on like who these people are that you're working with. And it's just really interesting.
That all links back, though, to this whole podcast is about being heavenly minded, what it means to be in the world and not of it. And we've spent most of this conversation, I haven't asked you any specific questions about being heavenly minded because you just naturally bring it in. Because I love that you said the minute you were with your little work family, you said that you cared about them, you loved them, you were going to be spending time with them. Do you think that that kind of has set you apart, being a Christian has set you apart? As you said, if your producer gives you something and you go, oh, I'm not sure about it, there are two ways you could go. As you said, you could either take a more direct approach and just go, no, I'm going to be a bit of a diva here and I'm going to put my foot down. But then there's also the opportunity to show your producer grace and love and the love of Jesus. So do you think that sets you apart?
Oh, yeah. It just feels so good to think, what would Jesus say? Yes. What would Jesus do? My rabbi is like with me all the time when he's teaching me and he's coaching me. What would he do? And I don't always have those words in my head, like what would Jesus say or do? But the more he's in you, the more you have the Spirit, the more you want to be like him. And the more like he reveals his love. I love how he works, who he puts in your life. And then when you recognize who he's put in your life, it's like, wow, oh, cool, I'm going to go with this. And it's not always like it's great. It's like, oh, no, are you sure about this? Are you sure? And just bringing it back to him.
Just to kind of round this all off, how do you stay heavenly minded when you're going to do a show, when you are DJing, just anything in your life? What is it for you that helps you to stay focused on heaven, to be in the world, but also not of it at the same time?
Yeah. The first thing is the armor of the Lord.
Yes.
It's a big deal. I forget to put it on.
I do too.
All the time.
Ephesians 6.
But yes, and when I remember, it's like I'm in worship and I'm so grateful and I feel like, oh my goodness, I'm one of your warriors. Like, so that's the main thing. When I go to the studio, and it's completely inspired by your show, Chloe. I may or may not have told you about this before, but
you may have mentioned
the way you open up your show with prayer just meant that when I began the show, I would be praying in the car on the way there, praying all day with nerves. And I get into this actual studio itself and no one's in there and the lights are down. And I just call on the Holy Spirit to be present. And I ask the Lord to bless every listener, everyone. And for Jesus to be present in the studio. And then I get to pray for my producers and love that the music that's in the show has been curated by us, you know. So it's mainly armor of the Lord. It's listening to worship music, stuff that you really love to sing. I think listening to worship music that you love to sing is great. Yeah, just knowing that you can rely on him for everything. And that's even like, can you get me home? Like, I'm alone. There are no cabs. It's raining. I need you to get me home. That kind of thing, you know? So I think that's it, yeah.
I love that. Well, thank you so much for opening up a little window into your world, if you like. And I love that. I mean, I'm sure you can tell this just from listening to Henrietta, the joy that you get from doing your show and that you just recognise where you are at. And I'm so excited to see what God is going to be doing through you. Henrietta, thank you so much for joining me on Heavenly Minded.
Thank you for having me.
Well, I think it's safe to say that I had a lot of fun chatting with Henrietta today. Thank you so much to her for joining us on Heavenly Minded, and thank you to you for listening. And while I'm here, let me remind you that you can listen to Henrietta's show every Friday night over on BBC 6 Music from 7 till 9. However, if you do want to listen to me on UCB2, you can do so. I am the Drive presenter after all, and I'm with you weekdays from 4 till 7. Don't forget to like and subscribe to Heavenly Minded if you can. You can stay up to date with all of our UCB podcasts by downloading the UCB Player app. See you next week, where I'll be back with another guest who will talk us through how they stay heavenly minded.